Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first session in the COVID-19 webinar series. Today's webinar is COVID-19 Resources, Regulations, and the Road Ahead. As we begin, please locate the Handouts tab in your GoToWebinar control panel to download a copy of today's slides, as well as the Questions tab to submit your questions throughout the session, as all attendees will be muted. With that, I will introduce today's presenter, Todd McCracken, President and CEO of the National Small Business Association. Thank you.
Todd, it looks like we're on mute, so I'm just gonna unmute you.
I think I'm unmuted now.
There we go.
All right. Thank you all. It's good to be with you all to share some information about the small business community and about the response to the COVID-19 crisis, the unique situation that small companies find themselves in, and what the response has been. As you all know, the economic picture for the United States has been fairly dire, and it's growing more profound. And when we started talking to small business owners when this was beginning to roll out in February, early March, the presumption by most people was that this would be relatively short-lived, and they were thinking how to get through to the next stages of the crisis. And now we're looking at a situation where it's been going on for some time. And it's unclear when it's going to end, how it will end, whether it will end evenly or in patches, either by industry, by region, by all of the above, and also what the response of the public is going to be when companies do begin to open. What will the customer reaction be? How much of the new normal that we experience today will be ongoing, even once we're past this initial crisis stage of the disease? So those are kind of some of the things we're going to talk about. But I want to make sure that we talk about specifically the programs that are available for companies. I want to talk about the situations that those companies face, some of the unique issues that some of the programs have provoked, and what the path forward might be, both in terms of the federal response and sort of new programs or modifications of the programs that we have, but also look again at the economy and how that's likely to roll out as we move forward. I'm sure you know, the major programs to help small companies that have been rolled out by the federal government are the Paycheck Protection Program, and that was in the most recent legislation that Congress passed, so-called Bill 3, dealing with it. Previous legislation and executive orders from the president combined to create the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which is a separate piece, which is also designed to help with this issue. And it's basically that second one I just mentioned. Actually, I should say it's the first one on your screen there, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, that was the first one to roll out. And is also the first one to be experiencing problems. That program modifies the disaster loan program that already exists within the SBA. It was designed to deal with tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, that kind of thing. It is modified to deal with this crisis that we see in front of us. What's unique about it is that it doesn't go through banks, it goes through the Small Business Administration itself, and therefore experiences some of the bottlenecks you would expect with a program where all these loans have to be approved individually. The loan amount initially was set based upon your needs. So that would be evaluated in terms of what the level of economic loss, economic hardship the business was experiencing as a result of the disaster. But again, companies would apply directly to the Small Business Administration, and basically any small company defined by the SBI size standards was eligible, including nonprofits of all kinds. And when they passed the newest piece of legislation, the Paycheck Protection Program, they added a component to the EIDL, the EIDL loan program, where companies, while they were waiting for the loan to get processed, could get an advance of $10,000 to help them with their ongoing expenses, and it kind of essentially tied them over until the main loan was available to them. Well, there have been some significant changes in the last week that I think people should be aware of. One, that the program itself is essentially out of money. They've made modifications to sort of skimp by with the remaining resources that we have, but initial applicants got basically what they were looking for from the EIDL loan program. They got their loans, but as it began to trickle down, now they're limiting total loan size to $15,000, and the advance portion they're limiting by size of company. So it's basically been $1,000 per employee, and that's put a lot of small companies that were counting on this in a box. They thought they would get a $10,000 advance and assumed they would get a much bigger loan down the road. So some of them actually have put some of their ongoing expenses on really expensive credit cards and so forth, only to find out now that they're not getting $10,000, and the total loan amount might be much less than they had initially expected. So that's been a challenge for a number of small companies because of the changes of that program that have just come about in the last few days. The other program that I mentioned I think has gotten a lot more publicity, the Paycheck Protection program, that essentially allows companies to get a loan and then to get most of it forgiven. The loan amount is set by essentially 2.5 times payroll. So a company can basically do an average of their payroll over the course of a year. They can only factor in the first $100,000 of salary for individuals that make more than $100,000. Take that average by month, and then add to it the average for other payroll expenses like health insurance, retirement benefits, et cetera. And that's your total payroll costs. And then once you do the monthly average of that, multiply that times 2.5 times, and that's the maximum loan amount you can get through a private bank for those loans. Any business can get those loans essentially, except non-501c3 nonprofits. So what we think of as charitable nonprofits, charitable foundations, 501c3s, they are eligible for this. Other nonprofits like trade associations, chambers of commerce, professional associations, et cetera, are not eligible for this program. Basically, the only real criteria is you be an actual business that was in operation on February 15th of 2020. And you can choose what your size standard. Essentially, you can either have fewer than 500 employees, or you can meet the SBA size standards, which vary by industry and industrial classification. So with that, there's a relatively simple application process where the SBA has waived most of the requirements on banks and the applicants to show that they have applied elsewhere, et cetera. This is a lender of last resort. All that is swept away to make it relatively simple for the borrowers to get this money. Once they've got the money, we are now finally getting reports from actual small businesses that are actually getting their loans approved and actually beginning to get some money. Then they have to worry about what portion of it can be forgiven, how much they have to pay back. If they have to pay it back, it's at 1%, and they don't start paying for at least 6 months. And if they decide that they don't need as much money as they thought, and or they just don't want to be so indebted as it looks like they might be, then one nice feature of the program is there's no prepayment penalties for these companies. So they can choose to, so if they get too much money, if that's conceivable, then they can pay some of it back relatively soon with really no penalty at all, and be out of debt. For the forgiveness portion, they can basically take 8 weeks of salary and payroll, not just salary, but payroll expenses as calculated before for total loan size. But instead of 2.5 months, they can do 8 weeks plus commercial mortgage interest. They can do utilities, and they can do rent. So long as those contracts are entered into by February 15th, you can sort of go in and rent a new space now, and then expect to get forgiven through this program. So that's the shape of that generally. And once you just document those expenses, you can go to your bank and get that forgiven. I've got a lot of questions from companies who say, "Gosh, how does the forgiveness work if I've had to lay off people? I've had to let them go," and it does impact that. Obviously, there's no requirement that you can't take this if you've reduced your workforce. You have until June 26th, I think. I'm about to say 25th. I think it's the 26th. To rehire the folks you've let go to sort of make sure you've maintained it. And if you don't maintain your workforce, then there is a step down in how much of that forgiveness you can get. But regardless, you can only be forgiven for expenses you actually incur. So if you don't actually, during this period, for an 8-week stretch, employ anybody, then you obviously cannot be forgiven for that portion of the loan you may have received. So it is designed specifically to channel that money into paychecks. The other thing I think is worth mentioning is that, and because this was not in the original law that was passed by Congress, was added administratively by SBA and Treasury after the fact, is no more than 25% of that forgiveness can be for non-payroll expenses. So for companies that have very large rent expenses, just for instance, where their rent expense might be larger than a payroll, those companies are at a disadvantage under this program because they simply cannot be forgiven for all those rent expenses under this program. They can only be forgiven for those payroll expenses. The other wrinkle to the Paycheck Protection Program is just yesterday we got guidance on how the self-employed can employ this program, and that's brand new, and that's a challenge because the program now is almost out of money. As I said, 2/3 of the money has been used as of Monday afternoon. I think it's a good chance they'll run out this week. So people who haven't applied won't get it until Congress appropriates more. I'll get to that in a minute. But the self-employed have to use their 2019 profits on their Schedule C, do the average, and they can also get forgiveness for 8 weeks of whatever that average from 2019 is, sort of for income replacement. Essentially, they don't have to actually have paid themselves a wage during this period out of money they don't have. They can simply use their 2019. The trick for those companies, of course, is that now they only have that guidance. The banks only now have that guidance. So if they haven't already applied, it might be tough for them to get in line to get the money in time before the program runs out, unless Congress re-ups this. So that's a real challenge for those companies. And there's a few other wrinkles as well that we can get to in the Q&A. The other thing before we get to that I think has been really important, I think a little bit overshadowed by all the loan and cash assistance going to small companies, was from the requirements on small companies from the Family First Act that happened a few weeks ago, which basically requires small companies and only small companies with fewer than 500 employees, to offer 10 days of sick leave to their employees on top of the sick leave they already offer for COVID-related issues, and then an additional 10 weeks beyond that of family leave if your kids are out of school, for instance, and have to take care of them. So the companies have to offer this on top of their existing benefits. So if you already offer 2 weeks of sick leave, essentially now you have to offer 4 weeks of sick leave, so long as 2 of them are COVID-related. And you have to pay full freight for anything that's actually illness or quarantine related, only 2/3 for the 10-week extended family leave or the 2-week sick leave if it's for non-sickness. So, for instance, school closures or to care for a family member, that's only required at 2/3 of pay. The positive thing out of this for small companies is that this leave, not the regular leave, but this particular COVID-19 related leave is being funded by the federal government through the payroll tax withholding system. So, and we were skeptical of this, and depending upon the size of the sick leave payments and the size of your ongoing workforce and what kind of filings you're making, Companies seem to be getting this money back essentially immediately, particularly those that are using a payroll service. The companies that I've talked to who've already done this, essentially it was immediate and transparent as was promised. Now, I don't know. There's a lot of companies that still file quarterly, still file without using a payroll service. And it's not clear to me what kind of challenges they may be running into that may be different from these other companies. But those are challenges that a lot of companies are having to face in figuring out if they are doing a partial furlough, how that interfaces with their leave policies, and then thinking through if they are getting a PPP loan, how they want to, and if they want to rehire people at what levels in order to maximize the forgiveness under that program and to maximize the income of their employees. Because the other thing I think people have to remember is that a lot of their employees are otherwise eligible for unemployment. And some of them may make more on unemployment than they were making in their business, but of course unemployment expires, and ideally at least a job might go on beyond that. So some people hopefully will still choose employment over unemployment if it means coming back. But there are also in the bill, and I think people really need to know about this, there's a provision for something called short-time compensation. So for states that are willing, and I think most of them already have these programs or would create them, employers can enter into an agreement with the state to agree to continue to fund benefits and other requirements, and if they do a partial furlough within a range, and that's again it'd be a little bit different by state of 10 to 50% roughly furlough of their employees. Those employees can get a pro rata share of their unemployment benefits without being subject to the usual income limits for unemployment, and also without being subject to the demand to continue a job search while they are unemployed. So this can be something that actually could provide for a while some substantial income replacement for some workers that are partially furloughed, and provide some benefits for companies. Unfortunately, while the federal bill passed that and funds it through a federal appropriation, most states still don't have their systems in place to accept these. So while they continue to promise that those benefits will be retroactive to the staff people that might take them, most companies still don't have a way to sign up for it or to enter into these agreements with the states. So that's something I think has not gotten nearly enough attention. And it could be a real benefit for those companies that don't have enough work now and can't keep all their people on, but want to make sure they continue to keep them working and keep them enrolled with the company for when things do turn up. For that future that is right now fairly uncertain. First off, I'm going to talk about the economy a little bit. I think when all this started and these programs were designed, frankly, the general expectation is this would last for a few weeks, maybe a month or two, and that's how they designed these programs. And so it's clear now that this is going to go on in some form longer than that. So these programs probably are going to need more money. The small business loan programs definitely are going to need more money. And so we have to look to Congress to come together to do that again. And we are already seeing further partisan splits. I mean, they're already getting back to what I would call business as usual, where they're fighting more with each other rather than problem solving. So hopefully they can get their act together and figure out a way to deal with these near-term issues. But of course, the other problem, of course, is they have to do all of these things almost on consensus because Congress is not in town. They're not planning to reassemble as a group. So anything that passes has to pass by what's called unanimous consent, which means that any senator or House member can stand up and say, I object, and whatever it is can't pass. And they have to bring everybody to town, bring them together in the same chamber, and that's very unlikely to happen in this current environment. So while I had been optimistic that they would provide more funding, given the way the disease has developed and people's reaction to it, it could be very hard, I think, to get this funding, even though everyone agrees that it is necessary. So that's a bit of a worry, I think, going forward. And then looking at the economy itself, it is not clear how we will come out of this. It's looking more and more likely that different kinds of companies and industries will be able to restart sooner than others, and different regions of the country will be able to start sooner than others. And the impact on a particular company still is unsure, because what happens when company A is in a position to restart and resume somewhat normal operations, but their customers aren't and their vendors aren't. And so it's going to be spotty and uneven, I think, for a while. That's the way it's increasingly looking. And then that's setting aside even the customer reaction for companies, small businesses that are essentially storefront operations. Even if they're given the all clear by the city, by the state, by the feds, to begin normal operations, will the individuals who buy from them still want to come in? If a movie theater now can open and show films again, will the normal audiences return anytime soon? So the long-term economic view is uncertain at best, at least for the next few months. So that's something our federal policymakers have to take into account, and they simply did not when they were designing these original bills. So I think I'm going to stop there. That was a very quick overview of the things that are happening and the impacts on small companies, but I know for a fact I wasn't able to cover everything, and there's all kinds of questions that people are bound to have. So let's stop and do some of those to the extent we can. So Sarah, do you have some questions?
Oh, we have plenty, Todd. So we're going to go through just from the order in which they've been coming in. So the first question we have is, what payroll costs are considered to be reimbursable by the PPP? Employer FICA, first Q1 2020 SUTA, so on and so forth. And really, what's considered utilities? Phone, internet?
Utilities, I think there's a relatively broad interpretation of utilities, and payroll costs do include, it's a relatively broad definition of payroll cost as well. So it's not just your employee compensation, but also the benefits and unemployment and all the rest. So it's a fairly broad calculation, fortunately, for what can be included. And that does get the loan size up. There's a lot of confusion from people because they calculate loan size versus loan forgiveness in different ways. And that changed as the legislation was moving through also. So there's a lot of misconceptions about that out there. So that's a good question.
Yeah, and the next question we have are any union fringe benefits allowed to be counted as payroll costs?
I'm not sure what you mean by union fringe benefits, but generally speaking, benefits are included. I'm not sure if it's something specific or unique that they're referring to. Maybe I'm not picking up on, but most fringe benefits are included in payroll costs.
Okay. All right, and we have another question coming in, a question about bringing employees back. What should an employer do if we've done layoffs back in early March, and now we're asking employees to return to work, but they're refusing because of childcare issues and just generally being afraid of the virus? We're exempt from FMLA. Will we be discussing these issues, or can you have any insight there for them?
Well, first off, I would question whether the company is exempt from FMLA for purposes of this law. It could be that you have more than 500 employees, in which case you're exempt from the additional provisions of the Families First Act. But generally speaking, companies with fewer than 50 employees, which are exempt from the FMLA, are not exempt from the 10 weeks of leave that are required for children out of school, to care for children out of school that are required in the Families First Act. So a company can apply for a specific exemption if they have fewer than 50 employees, and they can demonstrate a hardship to the Secretary of Labor. But it's done on an individual basis. There's not a blanket exemption for companies with fewer than 50 employees. So first off, I think make sure that you really are exempt from those provisions before you say that, because that clearly impacts your reaction. And really, it kind of comes down to, if employees are not don't have any legal grounds to refuse to come to work, and are nevertheless refusing to come to work, and you're ready to open, then that's a decision that the company has to make in terms of keeping them on. Unfortunately, there's no way you can get forgiveness for salary you don't pay somebody. So if a given employee won't come back to work, you haven't and has no legal basis for that, other than they don't feel comfortable, and you want to go ahead anyway, you can't hire somebody else and pay them. I mean, the forgiveness is not tied to particular individuals who are your employees. It's tied to your overall payroll, the number of employees, not the individuals who are doing it. So you just have to weigh in your own company how valuable the employee is keep long term, how much you want to sympathize with their fears. And that's going to vary, obviously, company to company and employee to employee.
Thank you, Todd. We have another question. My company is owned 33% by a U.S. citizen, so himself, and then also a Canadian company owns 67%, so it has dual ownership in 2 different countries. Will they be eligible for the EIDL or the PPP?
I believe no. The programs are using basically the definitions for domestic companies that have been used by the SBA's other loan programs. And generally speaking, majority foreign-owned companies are not eligible.
Awesome. And next up, are the advances a $1,000 per employee up to $10,000, or is it a lump, kind of like a lump sum?
It is. Well, it was initially advertised as a lump. And it morphed as a round of money into a $1,000 per employee up to a maximum of $10,000. So if you asked me today, it's the latter. If you'd asked me 3 weeks ago, I would have said it was a lump 10,000 because that's what it was. But
all right, we have a ton of questions coming in, and if we don't get to them all, we will make sure that we get them answered after this webinar. I just want to make sure everyone does know that. Next one up on this was, we applied for the EIDL 3 weeks ago and no word except a confirmation number. I can't find anywhere to verify what's happening. Do you know of any way they can find out a status or what's going on?
Unfortunately, no, but I've heard of a number of companies that have been in your position, and they have eventually gotten not only notification, but then money appeared in their checking account without much notification, actually. So you might find money in your account before you get notified that it's there, particularly of the advance portion, not the loan itself. But I was just talking to a small business owner up in Maine just 2 days ago. The exact same thing happened to him. He hadn't heard a thing, and then suddenly $10,000 from the EIDL loan, because he has more than 10 employees. The advance appeared in his bank account, and he got an email from the SBA saying he'd gotten it, and they were continuing, and he was going to get the maximum of $15,000 of a loan on top of that.
Wow.
So it is happening. Unfortunately, it is when you're waiting, it's a little bit of a black box, and that's very unfortunate and hard to plan around.
All right, next one coming in. We have applied and have been approved for both for the PPP loan via the SBA. Like everyone, we were very worried that our sales would decline drastically. However, what if it turns out sales, they don't suffer and therefore they don't really need the loan? Do they have to pay it all back, or is the payback portion still the same as it is for everyone else?
The payback portion is the same. You only have to assert that you felt that you needed the loan when you got it, and you can choose whether to hang on to the money and start paying it back after the 6-month period at 1% interest, which is a great deal, or you can pay it back in full or in part in advance with no penalty.
Great. All right. When does the 8 weeks start? I think it was once the loan is funded. However, because hopefully the payroll portion will be based off the company's pay cycles rather than start mid-cycle. This actually was a question from quite a few people on when does it really.
Yeah, it is worded in the guidance as when that loan is funded, and that unfortunately does probably fall mid-pay cycle for most people. We actually have asked for Treasury to do more clarification of that to see what flexibility companies can have in doing that, because the guidance is not as clear on this point as I think it should be, because it makes a lot of sense to me, and I've heard from verbal conversations with some officials, they intend some flexibility for companies on when they can start that 8-week clock, but the guidance isn't nearly clear enough on that point. So stay tuned. There could be more on that front coming.
Great. Well, it is the end of time. So these are all the questions that we can get to live on the webinar. But as mentioned, we will make sure these questions are downloaded and that we give them the appropriate time to answer them. Todd, if you don't mind going to just that last slide.
Oh, sure thing.
Great. We just want to point everyone, Sage on sage.com does have a COVID-19 advice and support page that is there for our customers and everyone in the like to find business support, free product training, additional advice. This webinar will be on demand post this to make sure you can listen on your own time if you want to listen back to any of the great advice and insight that Todd was able to give today. And again, these questions will be downloaded and we will make sure they get answered and posted on our resource hub as well. So thank you everyone for coming. Todd, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.